Hello, and welcome to the Payments Interviews, the podcast where industry leaders share their wisdom and insight. I'm Paul Skelton. I'm a payments headhunter who helps payments companies find exceptional sales executives. Enjoy the show. Today on the Payments Interviews, I'm going to be searching for life lessons and wisdom from people who are the best leaders in the payments industry. And I'm starting today with James. Welcome, James.
Hi, Paul.
If you can introduce yourself, that would be great.
Absolutely, yes. I'm James. I've been in fintech for about 8 years now. Today, I head up the expansion of Runa's sales teams into new verticals, into new markets. We're making some big product swings this year, and that's opening up our TAM a lot, which is leading to this need to define what our new ICP is and how we can really play in those space. And I've been given the very exciting task of leading that expansion.
Excellent. Look forward to delving into that a little bit deeper in a bit. But first of all, to start with you, so tell me about when you finished education and you decided you were about to go into the world of work. What was it you wanted to do when you first started off? Because for most people, in my experience, it tends not to be quite what they end up doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a very typical story where I came out of uni, didn't really know what I wanted to do. So jetted off to Canada for a ski season for a year. So I spent a year living in British Columbia in Whistler.
Oh, you're in Whistler?
I was in Whistler, yeah.
I've been there.
Have you really?
Yeah.
That was
absolutely.
fantastic. So I was pretending to be discovering myself and figuring out what I was going to do for my career, but ended up spending most of the time skiing and having fun. But coming back to the UK was the kind of defining moment for how I wanted to kick off my career. And so I had a bit of a fork in terms of what it was that I thought I'd do. On one hand, I'd come out of university with a politics and economics degree, and I thought that maybe going into international development, maybe going and working in the Foreign Office was appealing. But then on the other hand, business was also something that interested me. And from a business point of view, again, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And so I landed on consultancy. And that was the fork I took. I ended up going and working in management consultancy for the first 3 years of my career. The overarching kind of motivation was international development. So going into far-flung places in the world and thinking about how you can, raise the level of economic standing in those countries. I've been born in the Middle East.
Oh, wow.
And I spent the first 10 years of my childhood there. And so I kind of always had this internal desire to want to live in other cultures and other countries and travel. And as I say, I kind of forked right and went into consultancy.
Okay. And what was it that made you go into consultancy and how did you find it?
Yeah, I think a genuine curiosity about business without a real desire to want to specialize within a specific vertical at that time. And so the boutique consultancy I ended up working for I was the 33rd employee. And so we had a real specialism in media, but we also crossed lots of different verticals. Having that exposure across lots and lots of different industry types was, again, massively appealing.
Okay. And did you enjoy it?
I loved it, yeah. So the type of consultancy I was doing was massively focused around organisation design. So we'd go in and work with a company, typically a large organisation, on their strategy, figure out 3 to 5 year plan looked like, and then implement that through how the organisation was set up to deliver against that strategy. So one of the core things that I took from it was it didn't really matter what the organisation was or the vertical in which it played. So much of how the business was set up around human psychology and human motivations and what it is that makes us tick and work together and collaborate or not, and how you can kind of then use some of that learning and apply it into different verticals and different ways of working and that type of thing, and found it fascinating. Had a really amazing leadership team that I could learn from. Got taken under a very particular person's wing for the first couple of years, and he'd spent 17 years at the BBC, the innovation team. So he had some great stories and again, some fascinating ways of working. And I still apply a lot of those frameworks today in how I go about structuring my work and working with my clients or selling into other organizations. I suppose the things that was less appealing for me over time was that generalization. I was told you probably want to think about specialising within a specific vertical, because if you're too generalist and you're too broad, it's hard to then, as you get further into your career, start to apply yourself within a very specific sector, and then can maybe move out of the consultancy role into something in-house. And so, as I say, 3 years of doing that role, it gave me a fantastic foundation, but then the ability to then step into something where I could specialise a bit more, which is probably leading into the discussion that we'll have today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in terms of the lessons, I'm interested. So from my first job, I can remember there were sort of sound bites that stuck with me.
Right.
Like one of my senior bosses said, keep it simple, was his like biggest business lesson.
Yeah.
Another one was, I'll edit the word a bit, but he said, you're never stuck for options. There's always an option. You're never completely trapped. What was the thing that stuck with you most from the leader that you spoke about? What's the lesson that still you refer to today?
Yeah, I think definitely similar ones to you. I think simplification is, true intelligence, I think, is taking something incredibly complex and making it an incredibly simple thing to understand and convey and talk about and so on. Where a consultancy can add value is in that simplification process. You're always dealing with people. And so understanding people's motivations and their drives and the things that are maybe, holding them back within their role is how you can leverage that to help people. I think that applies within any role, but a lot in client-facing roles. Understanding that underlying human psychology is absolutely fundamental to those roles. And then along with that is the personability, like being able to build those relationships, build that rapport with people. Took a lot from those individuals that I worked with around that. They would overly index in the recruitment process and overly emphasize emotional intelligence alongside, general intelligence, IQ against EQ. And that EQ element, I suppose, is again something that I've always tried to work on, always tried to think about in the way I do my work, the people I want to bring in and how they'll perform within their roles and so on and so forth.
You then took quite a different step into the world of startups.
Correct. Yeah.
Talk to me about how that came about and what you thought when you'd been there a couple of weeks about how different it was, because I imagine there were some fairly significant differences between the people you work with and the kind of things you were doing.
Yeah, you could say that consultancy was based in Westminster. So daily I'd come into Westminster Station, I'd walk past the Houses of Parliament. When I came into a startup, our office was behind a door on Brick Lane, where you'd walk through the door, down an alley, and you would reach this basement office, no natural light.
Nice.
About 8 desks, I think. The corner of the office was cut out because that's where the bathroom was. So no privacy, it didn't really matter. The kind of environment, the day-to-day, getting to work, being at the office was almost a complete 180. And it was almost so much of a cliche of what I'd come from and gone to in the startup world that I couldn't quite believe it. So, in the morning, rather than walking past civil servants on the way to work, you were walking past some very interesting characters along Brick Lane at 7 a.m.
Okay. And so did you think immediately, this feels more like me? Or did you think, I think I may have made a bit of a mistake?
Good question. I felt like I was ready for more ownership in my role.
Okay.
And I knew the first day I started, basically, my new boss, the COO of a 10-person company, said, this is what your job is. Now go and figure it out. And then so immediately I was just thrown into the deep end of no one else is going to tell you what to do. I've got a really good grounding now from the years I'd spent in consultancy of how to structure work and some of those elements as I was talking about earlier. But really it was now, okay, I have to take on this part of the business, carve out whatever it is. And at that point, it was a fairly loosely defined remit. I was the first B2B hire. It'd been a consumer-facing value proposition, and we were moving it to a SaaS model where we were selling it into banks. And I was given that, and the first contract we were about to land, unbelievably, was with HSBC. So, one of the biggest banks globally, and very much told, that's your ownership. basically don't fuck it up.
Mm.
Like, you've got that contract, let's see it through. And hopefully then we can build the business to business element around that contract and other ones that we can add to it. So from day one, it was very much just go and deliver some outcomes to the business. Did I ever have the question marks around whether it was the right thing to do? I think there's elements of where you're put in these very high stress, high pressure situations. And especially in that first year, because I didn't know how to cope with them, where you do question some things. But when you start seeing the fruits of your labor and the business does well and it grows and you can bring in new team members and start seeing the revenues come in, and I think you stop questioning those things quite quickly.
So there would have been bits that I'm sure you would have been prepared for that are quite cliched in terms of you're not going to have everything done for you in a startup.
Exactly.
You need to get your hands dirty. It's chaotic, etc. What bits were you not prepared for? That, because there's a lot of people that will be listening to this that will think, I'd like to work in a startup, and they've got a glamorous idea of cool office where everybody's really up for it and everybody's striving for the same goal, and they like the idea of it being fast moving and getting results quickly. What's the bit that those people aren't thinking about that they would do well to remember before making the move?
You're hiring incredibly intelligent people, incredibly capable, who have a very strong idea of where the business should go, or where their part of the business should deliver the value. However, that can create a lack of focus or a misalignment within the business. And so one of the things I wasn't prepared for was, okay, we're adding all these great individuals into all these different roles, but actually we have to get them to all kind of come together around a specific set of priorities and with a very specific end goal, and everyone be aligned within the direction of travel of how to get there.
Okay.
And so what I hadn't anticipated was how quickly things can go off in different directions, and people can be, even in very small companies, people can be opposing forces within those companies, pulling each other in different directions. And the challenge with it being such a small company is there's not enough time, not enough resource, not enough investment to be able to do everything. And so it's so fundamental to have that level of focus within any company, but definitely early stage startups.
Okay, so clear direction and everybody pulling in the same direction.
Exactly.
I can relate to that. So I worked in a startup where there were personality clashes everywhere. Some people who are much used to working in bigger companies and want to do it their way, and other people are slightly more maverick and constantly battling and clashing heads.
Yeah.
Was that something that you saw? And did you find, like I did, that in a big company, things like that don't matter quite as much because, you know, there are structures to stop it. But in a small company, it can be the case that, you know, everyone's thinking, oh, come on, can we just get on with it? You're taking up too much airtime with this. Does that kind of thing happen?
100%, yeah. We saw it a lot. We saw it a lot. And, you know, you want to make big landmark hires.
Yeah.
The challenge with big landmark hires is that they will have such a strong opinion on how certain things should get done. And so they're great to come in, but they have to be aligned to your culture and your way of working and your thinking. They can add value in and help influence things. But ultimately, there's that cliche quote, which is disagree and commit. So I think it's from Steve Jobs or Apple or something. Here's me startup world quoting Steve Jobs.
Didn't take long.
Exactly. Wait till Elon Musk and Bezos come out.
Yeah.
But it's very much like, look, we might not all be on the same page on this one item or this one strategic priority, but if as a consensus, or even if it's a top-down decision, it is to do it, you have to, even if you disagree, you have to commit on delivering against that thing. How did you find it with these personality clashes? How did you kind of find that overcoming them? How did you overcome them?
Well, I'm not sure I did successfully, to be honest. One of the reasons why I left corporate life was because I wasn't as good at that. I kind of naively thought you could be good at your job and get on with people well, and that should be enough. And I found out several times in my corporate career that's not the case. Even if you've got the best of intentions and you want to spend time with individuals, getting to know what motivates them, I found that I worked in environments where people were very supportive of that in theory. It's much better to have said, I've doubled the number this month and I'm thinking about doing this, rather than the other way around. And that was one of the things that I perhaps didn't handle as well as I should have done. There's plenty of stuff I could talk about, mistakes I've made, but it's not about me.
Yeah.
In terms of, so what did you see done really well because you would have observed leadership there, leadership from the roles you had before, and what were the things that you think, that really worked to be able to get the best out of people? And in the startups that I've worked in and the roles I've had since, I always now do that. For example, there was someone I used to work with who used to have regular reviews on a weekly basis with people in their team where they say, this is what you said you were going to do. Have you done it? What problems do you have? What are you going to do next week?
That's fascinating, actually, because it's so simple, right? And it keeps them so laser focused on what it is that they're doing and then how that might connect to the overarching objective. I suppose it's fairly similar, right? I think that since I've joined work, thankfully, it's been such an important part to give people autonomy in their role. So you focus on hiring good, intelligent, capable people and don't tell them how to do their job. Maybe you give them a framework of prioritization. So this is the overarching vision. This is some of the strategic priorities that we're aiming for. But how you go about delivering against that is really up to you. Then you just see a mindset shift in people where, similar to when I first joined Bird, you have to just figure it out. You might have your own capability and your own ways of working and so on, but you just have to go and figure out what works for you. And that might be a bit of trial and error and so on. And so the things I've seen work really well is getting the prioritization right, getting the focus right in the business, and then bringing cross-functional operators really together, the people who are delivering the work, to come together to figure out how that work then gets delivered against those priorities.
You talked about that before with me in terms of having the right balance in the team as well versus operators and leaders. Tell me a bit more about that.
And again, I think it comes from my consultancy days, actually. So we'd go into the first ever project I did with Channel 4, and we were reporting right into the CEO of Channel 4 at the time. And we had a partner, an expert, they were an associate of the business, but they were very much an expert in their field. And then me, and I was actually an intern at the time. And the three of us would report right into the CEO. And so what you had is you had me doing basically all the grunt work. And then you had people who were at the top who were able to make the decisions and inform the report into the leadership that we were reporting into. And I think I've seen that work quite a lot within startups as well, where if you start hiring lots of layers of middle management who are there really just to manage people as the teams grow, you then get this disconnect between leadership and the decisions that are made at a strategic level and the people who are actually delivering the work. And so as much as you can, I'd advise any startup as they're going through their growth is try and limit those middle management layers. Really try and get the composition of your teams right, where people don't need lots and lots of, day-to-day management. They're kind of, as I say, capable and autonomous in how they go about delivering the work. They're the operators, but get them as close to your leadership as you can, because your leadership can add so much value, whether it's in a client conversation or it's within, taking a top level decision. Maybe some of the smaller decisions you allow to still take place in the teams. When it comes to enterprise sales, then I think that the key thing really is not to overload a sale. Like, not when you're coming into, because naturally when you go into an organization like HSBC, what you're going to find is you're going to set up a call and they're going to bring 15 to 20 people, because that's how the business is structured. They have these sign-off committees and these governance committees that everyone has to have a say, because it's so complex and it's global, and they have people coming in to kind of influence how the project gets delivered. But on your side, actually try and keep your team nimble, keep the right people in the room. And that's sometimes more of an art than it is of a science, but keep the right people in the room who are going to add value. Because the last thing you want is to just overload the sale with lots and lots of people who are adding an opinion and actually slowing down the process further than it needs to be, because it's already going to be a slow process.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. Art rather than a science. So essentially, I guess what you're meaning by that is that you have to read the personalities involved and think about who's actually adding something to the negotiation or the process, essentially.
I think it comes back to that human psychology point, right? Yeah. Like who's in the room and what do you either know or anticipate their motivations are for being in that room? So if you have compliance and information security and technology, and they're in there because they're reviewing you, they're looking at how risky you are as a vendor, right? And so on your side, you need to ensure that you've got enough credibility to interface into that. So, you know, you might have your lead engineer or your information security expert or whatever it might be. And so underlying what their drivers, their motivations and so on are for being in the room, then allows you to reflect that rather than just throwing in a couple of product managers because it might make you look a bit better, or, you know, throwing in a data scientist because you think that if they're not there to add value, it's typically what it will do is add more distraction into that room and not enable you to move as quickly as you can.
When I worked in FMCG, we used to call it the bow tie, I think,
as
part of strategic partnerships, because you'd have everybody meeting up in the middle and then things at the side that kind of mirrored each other. So I can remember when I worked at a company called Muller, you might have heard of.
Yeah.
And there we had like technical people facing off against technical people, and the relationship was so well run. It was with Tesco, actually. The relationship was so well done that the technical guys used to almost go off into their own little huddle and say, we don't need to listen to any of this. We know the important things. This needs to happen, that needs to happen. And over the months and years they've been working together, they had their own little routine. And, you know, we'd go out with them of an evening. They both knew what each other drank, and things had got to that level of the relationship where people got on and they were performing. It was done well,
and you can feel that in the cadence of how the partnership works, right? And suddenly, if you're in the middle of that bow tie, you're like, there's this like freeing moment where you don't have to be in everything. You don't have to be in every conversation because you trust the relationships there at other parts of the partnership. So even though you might be doing the kind of day-to-day work. I love that analogy, by the way, about a bow tie. Being an ex-consultant, you'd always draw up a diagram to explain how you envisage the partnership would work. And my partnership model would always reflect some form of similar kind of shape of a very small connected team in the middle, and then branching out into all the expertise that exists in both parts of the organization.
People love an image that's easy to remember.
Exactly right,
Okay, fine. So how did that, you know, the experiences that you had there, how did that impact your strategy for hiring going forwards? Because you've obviously been through that process a few times. How did you start when you were hiring people, and how did that change? Like, to give you an idea, like, you know, I think most people always come down to the analogy of, is this people good? Can I see myself having a drink with this person? Always used to be the kind of original thing. And then I think thoughts moved on to, I don't want to hire clones of me. I want to hire people that are actually potentially better than me. Yeah. And so there's lots of mantras that are out there, but what are the principles that you kind of stick to? What served you well?
Good question. I think I probably follow similar kind of mantras to what you were saying. I learned that like diversity of experience is fundamental to building a really dynamic team. And so in that business, they'd hired, you know, ex-fighter pilots who had come out the RAF and then gone on a training course and then gone into consultancy, and or a PhD psychologist who had done, you know, worked in clinical psychology and then come again into consultancy. So you have all these people who are coming in with different thought processes. And so when I started building the team, I really wanted to replicate that. To your point, I didn't want to just have clones of me. And because fintech, so I started building the team in 2018. Fintech as a term really came around 2014, 2015. As an evolving industry, you didn't have people who had 15, 20 years working in fintech. Today, a lot of the people that you're bringing into businesses might have had 10 years experience working in various payment fintechs or other types of fintechs. At that time, it was very much look at the types of transferable skills that they may have. Think about how those could apply within your context. Think about the individual, think about their client base and maybe the target kind of prospect list that they'd be going after, and try and marry up some of those kind of more capability-led, personality-led traits, as opposed to just they have been an account manager in this role for 10 years.
Yeah.
And so we brought in, someone who had been a product manager into a sales role, someone who'd been working as in kind of big tier 1 banks into a similar kind of role. And over time, we had this really interesting collection of people, which I thought was great. I thought it was really beneficial to the organisation.
So that's a thoughtful way of doing it, I think. And, I've quite liked in my time having people that are almost poachers turned gamekeepers.
Yeah.
To your point about being able to navigate a big organisation like HSBC,
Yeah.
if you have someone who used to work at HSBC in a relevant department and then came into your business, then there's an advantage to that straight away.
How do you find it is today? Do you find that it's evolving? Do you think it's changing? Do you think it's becoming, people are getting put more in boxes? How
there's a
how
lot
have you
of
seen it?
There's a lot of pressure on people that are hiring because they know that they'll be judged by how that works, and so people tend to default to what's the less risky option. And there's a lot of emphasis with particularly bigger companies on if this person has done it before, then they're more likely to be able to do it here.
Yeah.
So if I get on with them and they've proven that they can do it and they've got the numbers that back it up in sales, then that makes more sense than someone that used to be a fighter pilot and has decided to go into sales. Everybody likes the idea of that in theory, but it takes quite a strong and thoughtful leader, in my view, to actually walk the walk. And I fortunately work with people that do think like that. That doesn't really work for people unless, and this is going to sound self-promoting, but if you're working through someone like me, then I should have the relationships where I can say, let's say it was you, look, you should speak to James. James has been on the consultancy side, he's been on the startup side, so therefore I know him and I know that he brings X, Y, and Z to the equation. That's much more difficult if you apply directly, because people will receive it through and go, this bloke's a chef. Why is he applying for this? How's that going to work? And I tell you, from posting adverts on things, posting adverts on LinkedIn for jobs, the people you get apply, it blows your mind. Right. You can say, I need this experience and that experience, and it's non-negotiable, and you'll still get people that are window cleaners applying for it, which good for them in a way, but they need to have got that relationship where you're able to articulate their story via an intermediary, because it's hard out there at the moment to have 500 applicants and be able to justify interviewing a wild card candidate, which is kind of how people would class the people you're talking about.
I think so, yeah.
That's quite a long answer to your question, but
no, but it is. I think that's what I'm experiencing as well. I think I'm seeing less of a desire to take a risk on a candidate than maybe there was kind of 8-9 years ago within the fintech space. And I think it's becoming much more of a mature ecosystem now, that you do have people who have sold very much the same type of payment product into the same type of organization, and that's awesome. And you want to keep bringing those types of people in, but then do you then become more homogenous in your composition of team and culture and that type of thing? It's an interesting question. I haven't got an answer to it, but it's an interesting question that I keep deliberating within my own teams that I've built and kind of managed over the years. That
is the point of having someone that knows the market, knows the people within it, because you can say, I need, for balance within the team, my team because we work together, what I'm looking for and what will help it. I want options that work well for here and the things that are most important to me. And this is increasingly the case, especially with smaller companies. Cultural fit is the most important thing now. And so if you've got someone that works in my culture and they're good, then I'm interested in what you recommend. The aim of what I do is for someone to say, those are all good options. These are all these work and they're different people. And to have a bit of variety in your selection rather than cardboard cutout, this person has done he's been a VP of sales for 8 years.
Yep.
He's sold all the same stuff as everybody else that's on the list. Personally, I always liked a bit of variety and challenge. I can remember at the beginning of my career, when I was interviewing people, I used to like to, throw them a bit of a curveball as part of it and to see how they'd react, because they would certainly get curveballs from the customers.
Yeah.
So what's the best way of testing someone is giving them what they would have to expect in the job. You mentioned before that there's a million different things that you could be focusing on within a startup. And there's a million different lessons you can learn. What would you say that the biggest bits of advice you'd give to somebody that's going to be in a startup? What are the things that you think, the reason why I love working in a startup is because of this, and these are the things that have helped me that I wish I'd known from day one?
I'd say don't go into a startup because you're trying to escape something. Don't go into a startup because you've decided that you don't want to be in corporate world anymore. Because if you're really set up for the corporate world and that's all your experience, you're not necessarily going to enjoy the transition to a startup. And I've seen it happen a few times where people have kind of come out and then suddenly there's a lack of structure and ambiguity built into the business. And talking earlier about this concept of crossing the chasm, which is, I thought I'd come up with it. Apparently the book's been around for 30 years, but
attribution is just not coming, is it?
It's definitely not. Don't do it because you feel that the change is what you want. Do it because you really want to get into a role where you can add impact, add value, and you truly believe in the mission of the business that you're trying to join. So do it for the right reasons, which is an obvious thing to say, but I have seen so many people go from a very structured environment. They might have been at a Magic Circle law firm and come in as a GC into a startup, and then suddenly it's crazy and hectic and there's a lot of risk around and it's uncomfortable and unfortunately they haven't lasted too long in those roles. Maybe on a more positive note, because I know that's quite a negative slant, is even though we were talking about this kind of misalignment that can happen in businesses, but also because you can get so much done with such small teams or even on your own, is still try and bring people in constantly, whether that's internal or external. So, some of the biggest mistakes I've ever made is trying to do everything on my own.
Okay.
Because I felt that, I can cover all these bases and I know a little bit about this and a little bit about that. And so I can just work directly, me and the customer, and get things done and get things over the line. But then what I found is that actually, one, I've burnt out because, there's no way that your brain can cope with all of that kind of context switching and so on. But two, things just go slower because you haven't got experts who are coming in that can unblock a thing, like a very specific question that your prospect might have or so on. So again, it's a little bit cliche, but try and bring people on the journey with you, whether that's an enterprise sale or a customer that you're delivering for or whatever it might be.
And how do you think that the payment space is going to evolve over the next few years? What are the things that you're most excited about in this world?
So I'll talk to one quick point before I answer that question. It's why I think that I could potentially make the transition from payments to international development.
Go on.
Is I think that payments is absolutely fundamental for so many economies, right? Like the ability to move value around an economy is typically what underpins that economy. And so we're seeing, as an example, in Europe, there's all these payment networks that are being developed with much more sovereignty within the country itself. So you can look to Sweden, have the Swish network. It started off as a peer-to-peer payments network. It's evolved now to, I think, 99% coverage of the Swedish market use Swish. And the whole reason these payment networks are being developed in the countries is they're trying to get away from Visa and MasterCard.
Okay.
So they're very much trying to create their own sovereignty within their nation. And we saw it in Kenya with M-Pesa. There was a telecoms company that came in and saw most of the country are unbanked, and we need a way that we can help the economy develop. And that would be, how can I pay down at the local market? How can I send money to my friend? Previously, it was all done with cash, which caused a lot of crime and a lot of fraud and that type of thing. I think it was Vodafone actually came in and they said, well, everyone's got a mobile phone. So can we just move value between phone to phone? And then suddenly this incredible payment system called M-Pesa got developed, which massively from an international development point of view, helped the economy thrive and grow and all of that kind of stuff. So I think payments are fundamental in international development.
Mm-hmm.
Why I'm talking about that in terms of where I think payments are going and what really excites me is very much around things like the ability to just move money borderless instantly and at a very low cost. So today there's always there's a tariff tax, if you like, for remittances.
Yeah.
So you have, immigrants who are coming to various economies in various parts of the world who are then doing jobs and sending money home. It's hundreds of billions of dollars worth of value being sent home. Typically they pay something like a 7% tax, if you like, on moving that. And it might take 5 days and there might be, the bank might reject the payment and those types of things.
Yeah.
So one of the things that really excites me is this instant transfer of value. What that looks like, whether it's stable coins, whether it's payment networks that are transacting more with fiat currency or whatever it might be. I personally think it will be multi-rail. So I don't think there'll be one thing which will win. I think that we'll see that a payment network like Swish will really dominate within that market, but then stable coins might serve other problem areas really well, or gift cards might do something where you can move money borderless through that kind of network, or as I say, through the historical rails that Visa, MasterCard, Swift, those types of things I think will still exist. So I'm really excited about how that works, how that interfaces with things like international development and helping, economies grow and develop. Things like disaster relief, if you need to get money out into various economies very quickly, again, some of these new payment technologies are going to have a play. I probably wouldn't be working in fintech if I didn't, or in tech generally, if I didn't mention AI at some point. I am very excited about the role of agents within the payment ecosystem. So, we're seeing now that we're getting Visa, MasterCard, PayPal are releasing the capability for an agent to go and shop on your behalf. So, you can be like, I just want this white t-shirt that I love. And you talk to your phone and then it'll go and shop, it'll go and find it at the best price on the internet, and then it'll be sent to your home. And all you would have had to do is give the instruction to go and buy the t-shirt. I don't think we're a million miles away from that. So again, how that then changes the landscape, how that then changes the way that we browse, we search, we shop generally, we manage, our day-to-day lives, and then how payment interfaces into that will be really interesting, because payments is going to be absolutely key for then how the kind of the agent is and the purchase is made. So I think there's a lot of really exciting things coming down the line. I think there's also a lot of risk that comes with that, giving autonomy to a system to go and access your bank account and make payments in your behalf. Like, how much trust and kind of appetite is that from day one? I don't know. It'll probably take some time, but we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. And like crypto payments is a really interesting one as well, where we've there's a real divide, I think, between my generation and my dad's generation, who basically say it's never going to work. Warren Buffett describes it as rat poison, I think, and therefore for me it's never going to happen. Whereas what's that going to look like for the children's generation, where it's either going to be completely normal or something that we can't even foresee yet. I can remember when the internet was just starting, and they said one day people will be able to actually order things from stores which will then be brought to their homes, and that seemed absolutely mind-blowing. And now if it doesn't turn up that afternoon, we see that it's not very good service. Almost.
And the time horizon between those two kind of mindsets, I suppose, was like 15 years. If that. It was like, the internet really, late 90s was when it was really starting to kind of come into people's kind of consciousness a lot more. And you getting next day delivery from Amazon was late 2000s. It's not even 15 years, maybe 10 to 12 years. No, so it's like, how quickly will this technology move and be applied? And I think that's the important thing, is it has to have an application, right? That's where crypto, I probably, a lot of this discussion around cryptocurrency has been around for a long time, actually. You know, people in Silicon Valley in the 90s were coming up with ideas around digital currencies and how those could be applied. And then, you know, we really saw the advent of things like Bitcoin in the late 2000s, but it hasn't really still been applied yet. And that's still quite far down the line. But we'll see how that changes with the likes of stable coins and some of the platforms that are built on the blockchain and so on. So,
and you've, you know, like me, you've got a child, and what would be the one bit of advice you'd give them? So for me, I was always told, like, there were bits that I was really interested in doing. Like, I've always been interested in acting. I would love to have done that. My advice from my dad was, do it as a hobby. You're never going to be an actor.
Yeah.
And, you know, make sure you get a proper education behind you. I don't think I'd give the same advice to my children. I think I'd say, follow what you love and try and be the best at it. And always give everything a go so that you've scratched that itch, essentially, especially while you're young. What do you think would be the advice that you would pass on?
Probably something that I felt rather than I was given advice was always make your own decisions. And make those deliberately. My family setup has always been supportive. So they've always been supportive in the direction I wanted to take, but they've always allowed me to take the decision. And I don't think everyone necessarily has that. I don't necessarily think everyone has. Some people, they'll get influenced to go in a certain direction. As you say, maybe that's what happened with you, that you got influenced to take a different direction to what you may have wanted to do. As much as possible, I'd want to give them that kind of same experience of, you know, whatever you decide to do, whatever it is, I'll give you the support and I'll give you advice, but I won't influence it. Because if you take your own decisions, same in business, the same in running a team or working with a client or whatever it might be, if they take the decision, they will own that decision and they will see it through. And I think that's what I'd want to kind of pass on to my son. And if we have more kids, is I want you to feel ownership over your own life and feel in control over the direction that you take, so that you feel that you want to drive and be motivated and be ambitious and all of those things.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thanks very much, James.
Cheers,
That's
Paul.
been really interesting.
Good.
I really appreciate your time and your thoughts on it all.
All right, nice one. Thank you.
Cheers. I hope you enjoyed today's show. What questions should I have asked? Or what guests would you like me to interview in the future? Please let me know in the comments below. Also, if you'd like any help finding any senior sales executives, then send me a message here or look me up on LinkedIn. Thanks very much for watching.